Welcome to this evening's Smart Counsel for Life series. And we're talking about what are the nuts and bolts of reverse mortgages and when to use them today with Mr. Stephen Pepe, our reverse mortgage specialist. I'm Attorney Abigail Poole, and I will be speaking for a brief period of time after Stephen regarding where I come in, which as an elder law attorney, and when I am crossing paths with Stephen and doing some long-term care planning and how reverse mortgages connect with that. So just to remind you again, keep your sound off. If you don't want your face to be seen during the recording, you can turn off the video. And then we are also going to have you give questions at the end. So you can put questions in at the chat, which you can see at the bottom down there. Or you can hold your questions and ask your questions also at the end after we have stopped recording. So I wanted to give a little bit of information about Stephen here. So Stephen is my go-to guy about reverse mortgages, and not only me, but many of the elder law attorneys within Massachusetts and even further. So Stephen also takes care of reverse mortgages in California, DC, Massachusetts, of course, Maryland, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, and Virginia. And he works with the company Reverse Mortgage Funding, LLC. He's previously worked as a practicing attorney, a mortgage originator, a home equity conversion mortgage counselor. And we're going to actually have him put his contact information in the chat, if he kindly could do that, so that if you have any further questions for him, you can reach out to him personally or directly, and he can work with you and answer those questions. And he can also share that information at the very end again, too. So I may have mentioned it, but Stephen is today's star of the program. So he is going to share some basics about reverse mortgages for about 30 minutes. And then I will chime in at the end with some long-term care planning and talk about crossing of paths there. All right, so I am going to mute myself and let Stephen take it away. It's all yours.
Great, thank you, Abigail. And good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your night to listen to me go on about reverse mortgages. I hope you'll find this helpful. So reverse mortgages, what are they, right? The way I like to explain them is they're just another type of home equity loan, but they're different than other typical home equity loans in a couple of important ways. So any other kind of home equity loan has a required monthly payment that you have to make back to the lender. But with the reverse mortgage, it's a home equity loan that does not have a required monthly payment associated with it that you have to pay back to your lender. So all of you, if you're Massachusetts residents, you're sitting in homes you own, are probably worth more than they've ever been worth before. You have a whole lot of equity tied up in the four walls of your house. It's, for a lot of folks, it's at least 50% of their net worth is their home equity. But it's not spendable, right? It's wealth, but it's not spendable. It's locked up or illiquid. So it can be converted into spendable cash a couple of different ways, like selling your home or one of those more traditional home equity loans, or if you're eligible, a reverse mortgage. So what do I mean by being eligible? There's a couple of eligibility criteria, and they are as follows. One is your age, right? You have to be at least 60 for one program in Massachusetts, that's a reverse mortgage, and 62 for the other program, that's the other reverse mortgage you can access. So there's two main programs. If you're married, then at least one of you has to be 60 for one program or 62 for the other program. The other spouse can be younger and you can still qualify, right? So age is important. What else is important? Is it your primary residence? Because a reverse mortgage has to be used on your primary residence only. Can't be a second home, investment property. What kind of home? It can be a single family home, a condominium. It can be a 2 to 4 family owner occupied multifamily home. So you live in one of the units and you rent out 1 or 2 or 3 other units. It can be a mobile home if it is sitting on land you own. So it can't be a mobile home sitting on land that you rent. Okay. And a special note on condominiums, I won't get into a lot of details tonight because there's not enough time, but the condominium has to go through a vetting process, a due diligence review of its financials and its master insurance and some other things to make sure it's being run in a sound manner. What else to qualify for a reverse mortgage? Let's talk income and credit. So when I got into this business over 17 years ago, income did not matter at all because, again, there's no monthly payment associated with a reverse mortgage. So we didn't care about an applicant's income, nor did we care about an applicant's credit, as long as you didn't have an open bankruptcy going on and you didn't have a foreclosure within the last 2 years, then you qualified. Well, all that has changed. And all that changed because of a disturbing trend of people taking out reverse mortgages and then being bad at managing their money or whatever, and then falling behind on their real estate taxes or falling behind on their homeowner's insurance. So now, as a result, our regulators have come in and said, you do now have to pay more attention to income and credit. So we have to examine how much household income do you have coming in? And we have to perform this calculation called the residual income calculation. And if you're a household of one, you have to demonstrate you have at least $540 a month of residual income. If you're a household of two, you have to show you have at least $906 a month of residual income coming in. And in terms of credit, we look at the last 2 years track record on your part. How have you been paying your real estate taxes, paying your homeowner's insurance, paying your other bills that appear on your credit report? Have you been late? Why were you late? Was there an illness? Was there a death? Was there something else beyond your control? So we look at all of these things when determining your eligibility. And if there are late payments, it doesn't mean that you're going to be automatically disqualified. It just means we might have to take some additional steps to make sure you're on time with paying your real estate taxes and homeowners insurance going forward. Okay, so let's say you meet all that criteria. You're age qualified, you meet the income qualifying, the credit qualifying, it's your primary residence, and you live in a single family home or one of those other homes that that meets eligibility. So what do you do, right? So first thing to do is get in touch with a reverse mortgage lender and have them just work up an estimate for you, just to show how much you could borrow, what are the rates and terms, the interest rates, the closing costs, the size of the loan, the different ways you can take the money out, all of that kind of stuff, and have a conversation with that person. Next step, after you think about it and do some back and forth and consult with your elder law attorney at Samuel, Sayward and Baylor and discuss pros and cons and talk to your family or whatever else. Next step is a required consumer protection step called reverse mortgage counseling. So this is a necessary step for anyone who is going to apply. And it's a good idea for anyone who's just kicking the tires on the reverse mortgage program anyway, whether you've made a decision yet or not. So what is reverse mortgage counseling? There are 5 nonprofit agencies in Massachusetts that are trained by the government and certified to dispense this counseling where they take about an hour to an hour and a half of your time and they discuss the reverse mortgage program, what it's all about, pros and cons, alternatives, rates and terms, answer your questions, all of that stuff, so that you're hearing about how it works from someone other than the lender you're talking to. It's designed to make sure you're going into this transaction with eyes wide open. You can invite family members in on this counseling session or other people who you want to make part of the decision. You don't have to go it alone, and you don't have to do it in person. You can do it by telephone. Okay. So that's the next step. And then if you go through that step and you decide, yeah, I still want to apply, then you would go to the lender you choose and you would start that application process of signing all of the application documents, making copies of driver's licenses and homeowners insurance and tax bills and that kind of thing. And then the lender is going to take anywhere from about 45 to 60 days to put one of these things together, get it closed, and fund the loan. Okay. So that's the bit about the process. But let's dig a little bit deeper into the product itself, the mechanics of how it works, because this is, after all, a nuts and bolts conversation. So an analogy I like to use with a reverse mortgage is, think of it like a tab at a restaurant, right? Where you're borrowing money against your home. But as I said, you don't have to make any mandatory monthly payments. Okay. So when does a reverse mortgage have to be repaid? Well, a reverse mortgage has to be repaid if one of three things in your life happens. So the first thing is if you sell your home, right? You set up the reverse mortgage, you're borrowing this money, you eventually sell your home 5 years down the road. At the sale, like any other mortgage, the reverse mortgage is paid off, and then you get a check for whatever's left over after the mortgage payoff. So that's one life event. Second life event is if you, heaven forbid, fall ill or get injured and you just cannot live in your home anymore, and you have to move out to, say, assisted living or a nursing home, or move in with a family member or something like that, and you're absent from the home for more than 12 consecutive months. So that's got to be an entire year out of the home. If you're out of the home for more than a year, it's not your principal residence anymore, and you've got to pay the loan back then. Okay. Any money that you borrowed gets paid back. And the third event is your death. So if you pass away, then your estate has to repay the reverse mortgage. Or if your home's in a trust, the trustee has to see to it that the reverse mortgage is repaid. They would get up to a year. That's given out. You get an initial 6 months. And if it hasn't been paid back in the 6 months, it can be extended for another 3 months, and then again for another 3 months. But that's it. If it's not paid back within the year, then the lender has to start the foreclosure process. So that's when a reverse mortgage has to be paid back. But what a lot of people don't know is you can take out a reverse mortgage and you can keep making payments on it if you want to. If you're still working, or if you have a child who wants to make payments on it, or you hit the lottery, or you find buried treasure, or strike oil in your backyard or something, and you want to pay back the reverse mortgage, you can pay it down or you can pay it off without any prepayment penalty. So most people don't know that, but it's important that you do know that. So let's go back to my tab at a restaurant analogy. Here's how it works. You set up this reverse mortgage where you borrowed money against the value of your home. So let's say you can borrow $200,000 on your reverse mortgage. You set it up, and 6 months in, you need to take out $5,000 to get a new roof or something. So you contact the reverse mortgage company, you take that $5,000 out from your reverse mortgage. that $5,000 that you took out gets added into the tab that one day has to be paid back when one of those three life events happens. Okay. The moment you pull that $5,000 out, your lender begins charging you interest on that $5,000. But that interest the lender is charging is also added into the tab, all right, to be paid back in the future. So then after 1 year goes by, you have your $5,000 that you borrowed, and then let's say $200 in interest is accrued on it. So you owe $5,200 after 1 year. And then a whole nother year goes by and you don't have to touch any more money out of the reverse mortgage. Well, we're still charging interest on that $5,000. And then we're charging interest on that $200 of interest. All right. So maybe after the second year, there's another $600 in interest or something. I'm just making up numbers here, folks, just to illustrate the point. So at the end of 2 years, you've got the $5,000 plus the $200 in interest from the first year, plus $600 in interest from the second year. So after 2 years, you'd owe $5,800. So this tab just keeps going and going and churning until one of those three life events happens. Okay. While you have this reverse mortgage, there's a number of different ways that you can set it up to take the money out. All right. So the most popular way that people configure their reverse mortgage is setting it up as a line of credit. And with a line of credit, it's just as I explained, it's funds on demand whenever you need it. Your lender sets up a $200,000 line of credit and you withdraw it whenever you need it. Okay. One great thing about reverse mortgage lines of credit that don't apply to traditional home equity lines of credit is with a reverse mortgage line of credit, the unused line of credit actually grows bigger. You get guaranteed growth on the unused line. The federal government guarantees this on their reverse mortgage program. They insure one of these reverse mortgage programs. Federal government says, we guarantee you will get growth on this unused line of credit. So that $200,000 line of credit, if you left it there after a year, might become a $210,000 line of credit. And if you left it there another year, might become a $225,000 line of credit. So it's growing and growing and growing. And because of this growth, that is the reason why reverse mortgages are gaining quite a lot of popularity among financial planners who see this as a strategy for people to plan for long-term care that they don't need now, but that they might need 5 or 10 or 20 years from now. Because the strategy is you set up the line of credit today when you don't need it, and you give maximum time for that line of credit to grow and grow and grow. Because what might start as a $200,000 line of credit in 10 years might be a $400,000 line of credit, and in 15 years, a $550,000 line of credit. Then that's a substantial bucket of cash to pay for in-home care and that kind of thing. Okay. So line of credit, most popular way that people set up reverse mortgages. Least popular way is a lump sum. Okay. So that's just taking the money in a lump sum. Not recommended unless you need that money for a reason now. Okay. Most common reason why people need that money now is to pay off a current mortgage or a current home equity line of credit, where now the monthly payments are killing you, right? That's the most common reason why my phone rings. Is I have this $600,000 home with a $200,000 home equity line of credit on it because we had a mortgage to buy the home, and then we refinanced when our daughter got married, and then we refinanced again when her kids needed to go to college and we had to help them out. And then we financed again just to lower our rate and to put a renovation on. So now you're 75 with a $200,000 mortgage, and that monthly payment is not helping your retirement cash flow. So a reverse mortgage is a way to eliminate that monthly payment. And we would have to first do a lump sum disbursement to eliminate that mortgage. But to do a lump sum just for lump sum's sake, not recommended. And then the third way to configure a reverse mortgage is to set it up so it's dispersing monthly payments to you on an ongoing basis. And it can be configured to send monthly payments to you for your lifetime, as long as you live in the home, or monthly payments for a certain period of time and then it just stops. So that's another way to set these things up. So that's the disbursement option. You can change horses midstream. You can make one selection, and then 2 years in, 5 years in, you can switch over to another selection, right? To get this line of credit or to get the monthly disbursement option, you have to opt for an adjustable interest rate. If you are taking everything out in a lump sum, you can get a fixed interest rate. Okay. What else? Closing costs, right? To set up one of these reverse mortgages. Let's talk about closing costs for a few minutes. So these closing costs vary widely depending on the reverse mortgage program for which you apply. The most popular, most common reverse mortgage program out there is one, again, that's insured by the federal government, the Federal Housing Administration, or FHA. The name of that reverse mortgage program is called the Home Equity Conversion Mortgage, or HECM. So we call them HECMs in the industry. And on that one, it has a reputation of being a high closing cost loan because it is a high closing cost loan, right? So the federal government charges mortgage insurance as part of your closing costs, equal to 2% of the value of your home. So if you have a $500,000 home, that's a $10,000 insurance premium going to Washington, D.C. There's other closing costs involved, so that these closing costs on this HECM program, depending on the value of your home, can be anywhere from, say, $8,000 to as much as $30,000 if you have a home worth $1 million or more. Okay, so that's high. You're not paying that out of pocket. You're only paying the fee to that counseling agency I mentioned, which is a couple $100. And some lenders charge a deposit towards the cost of the appraisal of a few $100s. We don't do that, but other companies do. Most of those fees are rolled into the loan. We're financing the closing costs. So back to that tab analogy, if you have a HECM with a $20,000 closing cost obligation, then on day one, your tab is going to start at $20,000. And we're charging you interest on that $20,000 from day one. Okay. The other reverse mortgage program that's out there is a proprietary reverse mortgage that we offer. It's called Equity Elite. And that one has closing costs that can be as low as $999, but has a higher interest rate. So there's trade-offs. Pay less upfront, but we'll pay more in the long run because of a higher interest rate. But there's options out there. Everyone was only selling vanilla. Now we have chocolate. So we have vanilla and chocolate, which is 100% more than we had a few years ago. So that's that program. But I think people get understand that tab analogy on how this is going to be an increasing loan balance over time. What you owe 2 years and 5 years from now is going to be more than what you owe today. The reason for that government insurance is to make a reverse mortgage what's called a non-recourse loan. And here's what that means. Let's say you set one of these up, you live a couple more decades in your home, and you took full advantage to live your best life possible with this money. You've gone through it all, and after 20 years, you've built up a balance of $500,000. And then you're selling your home, or you're not around anymore, and your estate is selling the home. You owe $500,000, but your home is only worth $400,000. Well, under the terms of the loan and under the regulations as they're written, you're only on the hook for paying back 95% of what your home is worth in the future. That 95% of that 400,000, even though you owe 500,000. That insurance is covering the difference so that you and your family can't be sued for the difference. The lender can't go after other assets you own. All these remedies that regular mortgage companies with regular mortgages can do if they foreclose on you and they auction your home and you still owe a balance. Reverse mortgage lenders can't do any of that. Okay. So those are reverse mortgages in a nutshell. Again, whether people realize it or not, when they're talking about reverse mortgage, most of the time they're talking about that federally insured home equity conversion mortgage, the HECM program. The most common reasons why customers come to me is 1, paying off existing mortgage debt, and 2, using it to fund private pay in-home care. Okay, those are the 2 most common reasons. Sometimes it's care they're receiving now, and sometimes they're anticipating care they might need in the future. Okay. So that's it. Third, then behind that, it's just paying the bills, just doing it so that instead of living a life in retirement of I've got to pay my real estate taxes and my insurance, and then groceries and utilities, and after that there's very little for me to go out to dinner or to go down the Cape or do those other things that I have fun doing, to just help alleviate some of the month-to-month financial burden. And that's another common reason why people do it. And finally, and I won't really get into it much other than to say you can use one of these to buy a new primary residence as a purchase mortgage. So if you're thinking of downsizing, you're thinking of moving closer to kids, you're thinking of moving somewhere warmer, and you're saying, great, I'm going to sell my home for more than it's ever been worth. Oh no, the home I want to buy costs more than it's ever costed. How am I going to afford this? You can use a reverse mortgage to buy a new home without having a new mortgage payment. It's a different conversation, and I'd be more than happy to have an offline conversation, or if there's time left tonight to go into any of that. So I can stop right there, Abby, if that makes sense.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, so I'm going to just spend a few minutes now that Stephen's kind of laid the foundation with the basics and about reverse mortgages. He mentioned how they can be utilized in long-term care planning. So I wanted to spend a bit of time talking about how that would particularly apply in the long-term care planning realm. And when I am offering or discussing that as an option, or I'm reaching out to Stephen and saying, hey, maybe this is somebody that is interested because they're doing some of this long-term care planning. So first, I want to kind of discuss, well, what is long-term care planning? And when I say long-term care planning, I'm talking about ways to fund paying for your care in the event that you need care at home, which Stephen touched on, or you need care sometime in the future with regards to a skilled nursing facility. So at some point in the future, if you may be looking at paying for that kind of long-term health care, then we are thinking about what things can you do now to be able to set yourself up strategically to be able to pay for that care. And how are you paying for that care? Are you paying out of pocket for that nursing home care? Are you looking at maybe paying via Medicaid? So just to remind you, Medicaid is that public benefits program. It is state and federally funded where you have to qualify to be eligible to receive those benefits to pay for care, especially in a skilled nursing facility. And there also are some different eligibility criteria in the event you're staying at home and need to receive Medicaid, also known as Mass Health here in Massachusetts, to pay for that kind of care. So I see people in a couple different situations. One is we're planning in advance for that possibility. And then I also see people who are in crisis. So this is something has happened to a loved one. I'm either seeing the person or I'm seeing the child or another family member who has to step in and help make decisions for that person who is in crisis. And we're working through the different options to pay for care. So with regards to Medicaid, that's different from Medicare. Just to remind you, Medicare is what you're entitled to once you hit age 65 for health care benefits. Medicaid, like I said, you have to be eligible for it. And there's certain criteria from a financial and medical perspective to be eligible. So very quickly, those eligibility criteria are, if you're an individual, you can only have $2,000 in countable assets, such as a bank account. So that's all you can have in your bank account. You can't have retirement accounts. You can't have investment accounts. You can't have stock. $2,000 in a bank account. And then you can have your primary residence. The other thing that you can have as couples is that the person who is potentially going into the skilled nursing facility can only have the $2,000. But if there's a spouse who's staying at home in the primary residence, that person at this point can have, I think it's about $138,000. That number does change annually. So I would anticipate that would be changing fairly soon. So combined, you can have about $140,000 plus your primary residence. So one of the reasons that you can have the primary residence is that Medicaid can always be reimbursed for any expenses that they have covered for your care during your lifetime. And they can be reimbursed for that care at two different points. They can be reimbursed if you are alive and you go to sell the property. Then they get their cut for the expenses that they have covered after you've received the benefits while you're alive. And then potentially you also get kicked off of Medicaid because now you've got a chunk of change in your pocket that you can use to pay for your care in the skilled nursing facility instead of Medicaid paying for you. The other way that they can be paid is that they can file a claim after you have passed away against your probate assets. So if you pass away and you own your home in your individual name, and then that asset has to go through the probate process. And at that time, once you file the documents with the probate court, then Medicaid can attach a claim and the property would need to be sold, and then they would get their cut of the proceeds to pay off the essentially the expenses that they paid on your behalf. So there's certain strategies that can be employed to protect the primary residence, to preserve it for inheritance for your children, while still simultaneously setting you up in a way to receive Medicaid benefits. And a couple of those strategies you may have heard of. One is a life estate deed, and the second is a irrevocable income only trust. You've probably heard of that one. I know they have the ads on the radio, or you hear other people talking about them on a pretty regular basis. I call them Medicaid trusts because irrevocable income only trust is quite a mouthful on a pretty regular basis as I'm talking about it. So with these Medicaid trusts, essentially the way it works is that in order for the property that is held in the Medicaid trust, you would transfer the property to this Medicaid trust. And you are the person, the grantor, who makes this transfer, but you cannot be the manager or the trustee of that trust. You can be the income beneficiary of that trust, but you can't be the principal beneficiary or owner of the trust or the property that's in the trust. It's very similar also. So what that does is that because you don't own it and you don't control it necessarily, then you are, it's not something that's considered countable anymore when you're applying for Medicaid benefits. And also, after you pass away, it's a trust. So it's passing outside of probate because it's not held in your individual name anymore. So there's a couple ways, there's two fronts there that it's beneficial to use these irrevocable trusts. But the key issue is that you're giving up a lot of access and management of that house, your primary residence that you've transferred to the trust. So that can be a significant disadvantage. One of the other things to keep in mind about irrevocable trusts and the life estate deeds, which I'll talk about in just a second, is that there's the 5-year look back period with regards to Medicaid. And the 5-year look back period is this: when you take an asset and you gift it, so you're transferring it to an entity or another person, and they're not paying you in exchange for that transfer fairly, then that is considered a gift. And Medicaid, when you are applying to get benefits, they look at what you have done with your assets, your home, your bank accounts, all of those things for the last 5 years prior to your date of application. So if you have transferred your home, you've gifted it to this irrevocable or this Medicaid trust, then that is that how your property could be a significant gift. And if you had held on to the property, Medicaid could have been able to file that claim after you pass away, or get a chunk of change if you sold it during your lifetime as well. So they're not too fond of people giving gifts like that during that 5-year look back period. And usually you have to either give the gift back, it has to come back to you, which can be difficult to achieve, or you get penalized. And Medicaid says you do not get to receive any benefits for a period of time that is essentially equal to more or less to the value of the asset that you gifted away. So when we're thinking about long-term care planning, we're thinking about utilizing these tools, but we're also thinking far in advance and how to do that. So the other option is what's called a life estate deed. And a life estate deed is something where, again, you're giving away a portion of the interest in your property, but you're also retaining an interest as well. So you're reserving or retaining a life estate. So for example, I have clients who want to give a portion of their interest in their property to their children, but they hold on to a portion or an interest of that property as well during their lifetimes. And I like to use, I know that Stephen used this analogy of the tab. I use a pie. So, so your property is a whole pie, and a life estate is a slice of the pie. And so you owning the life estate piece, that actually shrinks as you age. And the remaindermen, the folks who own the rest of your property, their piece of the pie grows. until you pass away. And at that time, the remainder men own the entire pie. So the way that works then from a Medicaid perspective is that you don't have as much value in the property while you're alive. And when you pass away, that property does not go through probate. So that means they cannot file a claim and be reimbursed from your primary residence. So what does all of this have to do with reverse mortgages? What it has to do with reverse mortgages is that you can get a reverse mortgage, but also still engage in this long-term care planning strategies, especially with regards to your house, which is oftentimes your largest asset. So you may decide that you get a reverse mortgage because you're looking at paying some of those landscaping or housekeeping bills or in-home care. Maybe you want to, you're anticipating those in-home care expenses and you don't want to draw down on your retirement accounts. Instead, you want to use the reverse mortgage to pay for some of those expenses. Then you can get the reverse mortgage, but reverse mortgages are unique in that you can also do that long-term care planning. You can do a life estate deed. And so you're also protecting and preserving that asset so that your children could inherit the property after your passing, and it's protected as long as you've done it 5 years in advance if you go into a nursing home and you need Medicaid to pay for your care. It's also the case with regards to Medicaid trusts. So you could get the reverse mortgage and then you could also transfer the home into the Medicaid trust. So this is actually a good example is when I actually first started working with Stephen, which is I had a client and she had gotten a reverse mortgage several years previously. And she and her children were at a place where they wanted to make sure that if she ever needed to go into a nursing home and she needed Mass Health or Medicaid to pay for her care, that the house was protected. So there would at least be something for her children to inherit after she passed away. And so after reviewing the reverse mortgage with Stephen and working with him and with the clients, the decision was made that a life estate deed would be the best solution to reach her or meet her goals there. So not only can you get the reverse mortgage and then engage in some of that long-term care planning, but you can also do the reverse. So you can engage in the long-term care planning and then get the reverse mortgage. So for example, I could meet with clients and they could say, you know what, we don't want a reverse mortgage now, fine. Then, but we do want to transfer our home. We do want to do a life estate deed. We want to give a portion of our property to our children, and we want to retain a little slice of that property pie. And we're, maybe we're not in the best of health, so we anticipate maybe a little bit more in the future that we might need a nursing home care or we might need care in the home. And so we just want to set ourselves up for success and protecting the property for kids, but at the same time also allowing us to be in a good space 5+ years down the road to then apply for Medicaid benefits. And so that's when you can certainly do that. We could do the long-term, that life estate deed. And then if we are a few years down the road, they may say, you know what, we are at the end of, we've gone through a lot of our money paying for that in-home care. We could say, well, let's leverage some of the equity in your home by looking at doing a reverse mortgage. And that's again when we would contact Stephen and say, okay, can we do this? The answer is yes. And then what are then he would walk us through allowing you to access those funds to then help pay for in-home care. Again, that might be a much better solution than having the digging into your retirement accounts and burning through those to pay for care. So the same rings true for Medicaid trusts. We could transfer the house into the Medicaid trust and then do a reverse mortgage. However, it's a little bit more, there's a little bit more complexity to that kind of strategy, but it's not something to be taken off the table. It's something that would be looked at more closely. You have to look at the terms of the trust to see if a reverse mortgage is possible. So there's some specific language about that needs to be included to allow for reverse mortgages to be an option. So those very quickly, that's really the where I interconnect or where I connect or cross paths with long-term care planning and reverse mortgages from my perspective as options. And it's really to protect the home. So I think that, is there anything else that you wanted to add, Stephen, that I maybe didn't hit on that you feel would be helpful for folks to know?
Just that if you do the planning first, the life estate deed or the transfer into trust, and then get the reverse mortgage later, all I'll say is you've got to make sure you have the family members who are also part of those documents on board with you with getting the reverse mortgage, because they have to play a role in signing some things and doing that counseling also that I mentioned. So sometimes there's family disharmony
Mhm.
and there's a child who's saying, no, I don't want mom and dad to do this, so I'm not going to agree to anything. And then you've got a problem.
Yeah.
So I'll just add that. So
That's a great comment. And that does bring to mind that when doing this kind of strategizing, this kind of long-term care planning, I'm really looking at all the options and tailoring it to what your current goals are, what your assets are, what your expenses are, and what your current health situation is. So there might be something that right now, based on all of that information and what kind of risk you are or are not willing to take, then I might say, here are some of your options. But it could be a few years down the road. Maybe the assets have been depleted. Maybe your health care or your health has changed significantly. At that point, there might be some other options that are available. So we get pretty detailed about all of this information because it all fits together like a puzzle and talking about what options are available for you from a long-term care planning perspective.
and I know that Abigail, your firm, I'm sure, big believers in long-term care insurance, and I hope everybody on this in this conversation has it, but chances are not everybody does. But just know that with reverse mortgages, there's no health underwriting that goes on. So, unlike long-term care insurance, where health is very much an eligibility criteria, that is not the case with reverse mortgages. Sometimes my applicants are on hospice or
Mm.
at the end of their life, and they just want to remain at home for the rest of their lifetime, and they can't even understand the transaction anymore. So we have a power of attorney or a conservator doing the paperwork for them, doing the counseling for them. So wanted
Yeah.
to add that to the conversation too.
That's a great example of kind of one of those in crisis situations that we want to that it could be utilized for 100%. So, all right. So I think what we'll do is that we'll end the presentation and then we will answer questions. And